Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to AP US History Online with Mr. E. This is Mr. E's History. All right, let's get to our show. What is the POV? So let's get started. Today's lesson, guys, is going to be on manifest destiny. So what's the point of view uh, in this political cartoon, right? Notice all details. Let's get 30 seconds on the clock. Hey Google, 30 seconds on the clock. Hey Google, 30 seconds on the clock.
Sure, 30 seconds. Starting now.
Don't ignore me, Google. I don't appreciate it. Okay, hey Google, stop. Oh, oh, okay. So, we see a train with a bunch of dudes full of bags of money. You can see what they're saying. Look, it's a land rush, a new start, cheap land for me. And then the poor Mexicans are like, should we be worried? Yeah, they should be. Okay, the natives are like, oh no, what's going on? So the point of view is kind of showing the other side, right? Showing the voices that aren't heard in history. So sometimes we like to focus on, just the American perspective, the settlers, the expansion oriented people. But who are the people who are on the other side of it, right? So the Mexicans and the Native Americans, they're not going to be too thrilled about Manifest Destiny. It's going to impact them in a very negative way. So today we're doing period 5.2 Manifest Destiny and 5.5 Sectionalism from our period 5 review. Today's expectations, the causes and effects of westward expansion, okay, from 1844 to 1877. So we're going to have to bring about contextualization from period 4 to help us with period 5, right? So the effects of immigration in American culture also. So we're going to use sourcing. We're going to explain historical concepts, developments, and processes. Great. So what is manifest destiny again? All right, it's another terminology that we'll have to use on our essays, on our DBQ potentially. Um, so it was a concept that was coined by a dude who was kind of unknown. His name was John O'Sullivan, and he kind of coined the phrase in one of his articles, and people kind of started to use it, and they kind of misquoted him. But essentially, what it refers to is moving west, expanding west, creating a national identity, a Pan-American identity, um, and spreading Western culture instead of Native American culture or Mexican culture, right? So it also has a religious connotation, right? That God gave Americans this destiny because they were Christian and then they were superior culturally. So they had to spread civilization, quote unquote, to the Mexicans and to the Native Americans. The Mexicans were already Christian and the Native Americans were already civilized. They already had their own cultures, very diverse, complicated cultures with, a monotheistic religion as well. But when you use God to justify some sort of domestic reform policy, it usually has more weight to it, more gravity to it. Okay, so keep in mind the expectations and the skills as we move along. All right, so American progress, we've seen this in class. This is like, it could be a document on a DBQ. So it's just summarizing the POV of the Western, culture, the American settlers. They saw that, look, they're moving from the east, they're going to the west. The west is kind of dark, the east is kind of bright because it has the settlers already, it has the Americans. So the Americans are bringing technology. She's bringing spectrum cable. Oh no, she's bringing the telegraph line uh, to the natives, to the buffalo, and they're kind of running away because they're ignorant, right? So this is a very like pro-expansionist, pro-manifest destiny picture, right? And it's the title, American Progress. So we're bringing progress, whether you like it or not. And if you don't like it, that's because you're ignorant and not civilized. Okay, and it has a so let's keep going. Reasons behind manifest destiny: population increase. Okay, the country is having a population boom. It's doubling over the course of a few decades, and so there needs to be more land. Poor land use is a big one. Why are people going to move west? Well, they don't use the land the right way, and they deplete the soil of resources. And so when the soil has no vitamins, it will not make any more crops. So they're going to have to keep using more land and move west, move west, move west. Especially population growth, guys. More population, more land. You're going to need more land. Economic depression, guys. There were two economic depressions in period four. We talked heavily on 1837, Panic of 1837. 1819, that marked the end of the era of good feelings. Um, it was just mismanagement by the fiscal policies, with regards to like foreign trade, tariffs. Um, a lot of people were collecting too much debt, and they weren't being held accountable. So it was causing like a debt crisis. So in 1819 there was a financial collapse, and in 1837 as well. There was nothing to stop people from and stop banks from making poor decisions. Um, okay, so in the West, it's kind of like a quick fix. If your life is bad, then you're going to move west um, in order to have a better life, right? So free land, instead of working in a crummy factory, you can just move west and have a new life. So these new trails are going to happen. People are going to take the same trail. It's like a route, Oregon Trail, which is an awesome game. If you've never played that game, you should try it. It's kind of nostalgic for the millennials, right? But it was an old computer game, and you had to survive. It's actually pretty fun. It is quite difficult. You know, you'd always die of dysentery or something. It's a fun game. Santa Fe Trail, Oregon Trail. Check out Oregon Trail. Very fun game. All right, James K. Polk, Manifest Destiny. Okay, so James K. Polk was homeboys with Andrew Jackson and Martin Van Buren. They're going to have this expansionist policy. The Whigs, on the other hand, are not going to be pro-expansion. The Whigs are not pro-slavery. The Whigs, they are more inclined to side with free soil, right? And they don't want to have the country taking land and acquiring debt and all these problems. So James K. Polk, because he was a super big on expansionism, he was able to win his election against Henry Clay again. Henry Clay loses again, fourth time. And so James K. Polk, he settles the deal with Oregon and the British. So we're going to get this huge tract of land, get Oregon. Then we're going to get Texas, and that's going to cause a problem with the balance of free and slave states. And he's going to bring us into the Mexican-American War, guys. And I pay a lot of attention to the Mexican-American War because the Valley was the source of the conflict. The Rio Grande Valley was a disputed territory between Mexico and the United States. And the first shots fired of the Mexican-American War actually happened in Brownsville. So the Valley has some pretty intense history in the books, guys. Okay, so we're gonna have some fallout from the Manifest Destiny. Trail of Tears, for instance. Not just Trail of Tears, but the Native Americans are going to be struggling consistently against the white settlers who are moving west and encroaching on their lands, right? Mexican Cession. So, because we defeat Mexico and we get, like 2/3 of their territory, we pay for it, but it's kind of like a slap in the face. We kind of took it from Mexico because we felt, well, we're superior. They're not going to use it the way we will. Um, and so it's going to cause problems, guys. So when we get this land, then the issue is it going to be slave or is it going to be free, right? So this balance of slave and free is going to keep on intensifying the slavery question, right? Um, so if you have your phone, scan the QR code and let's check that out, guys. It's going to be a really cool documentary on that. Okay, So, slavery or not, oh wait, one sec. Before I get too far ahead of myself, let's try this one more time. Okay, good. We already have him loaded. Let's take a look at Manifest Destiny, guys.
Pinsker, and I'm a historian. Here are a few things you need to know to sound smart about Manifest Destiny. People think of it as the official policy of territorial expansion, the idea that God had blessed America to become an ocean-bound republic in the 19th century. But the truth is, presidents and secretaries of state, they didn't use the phrase Manifest Destiny. It was the slogan of a journalist named John L. O'Sullivan, who invented it in 1845 when he was writing editorials about the annexation of Texas and about the boundary dispute with Britain over the Oregon Territory. He said it was blessed by Providence. It was the manifest destiny of the country to become this continental power. It immediately became controversial at the time. The phrase itself was used more by critics than supporters as a way to ridicule expansionism. Whigs and others opposed it. A lot of Northerners thought it was code for spreading slavery. In fact, a lot of manifest destiny advocates, people who believed in territorial expansion, they felt like they had failed. They didn't think the country was spreading widely enough. They wanted all of Mexico. They wanted Canada. They wanted the entire continent to be part of the American Republic. The phrase actually kind of disappeared from American political life until the 1890s, when it was reborn as part of the drive to make the United States a global power. Some people began to talk about expanding into the Caribbean or the Pacific. This is the era of the Spanish-American War. And that's when Manifest Destiny became ever more popular. But the irony is, by that point, John L. O'Sullivan, he had died in 1895, and when he died, his obituaries didn't even mention the fact that he was the author of the phrase. He had sort of struggled and fallen into obscurity by that point. It took decades for historians to recover his role. And it's taken a lot of time for people to realize that the policy of Manifest Destiny was really a contested one that was controversial at its beginning and remains controversial today.
Excellent. Great job by Matthew Pansker. Okay, so slavery or not, guys, this is the main ideas, one of the main ideas for Period 5. Trying to balance the power of states in terms of the issue of slavery, right? Slave states, free states. So after the Mexican-American War and the Mexican Cession, and we get all that land for Mexico, a congressman by the name of David Wilmot is going to come up with this proposal called the Wilmot Proviso. The Wilmot Proviso just pretty much said, look, any new land that comes into America will not be slave, right? So essentially, like any new land that we got from Mexico, let's not make it slave. Let's leave it untouched, right? So it didn't really get passed into law because it didn't get passed in the Senate, so it didn't work there. So there's going to be some more debate, right? The anti-slavery advocates, they're going to want Washington, D.C. to not have slavery, and the pro-slavery legislators and politicians are going to want stricter fugitive slave laws so that if there's runaway slaves, they can get the slaves back in the South. The issue of California is coming up with a lot of people moving to California for the gold rush, right? And the San Francisco 49ers are named after the gold rush, okay, 1848, 1849. Although the San Francisco 48ers doesn't sound as good, right? Maybe they would have won the Super Bowl if they had a different name. Who knows? So, great compromiser, the great nullifier, okay, different politicians we're going to talk about. So Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun, really got to know these guys. Henry Clay, he was the guy who, you know, if you ever feel like a failure, just think you're not as bad as Henry Clay. He lost presidency 4 times. Right, so Henry Clay, as a great compromiser, he was the one who authored the Missouri Compromise, and he was the one who came up with the Compromise of 1850. So that's why he's known as the Great Compromiser, because he's going to keep trying to find a way to keep a balance of slavery and free states to keep the issue of slavery at rest, right? But John C. Calhoun is going to hate that idea, right? So John C. Calhoun was the vice president of Andrew Jackson. He's also a very powerful senator. He's going to be on the other side of the argument. He does not, he's like pro-slavery. He says slavery is a positive good. It's a good thing. It's not a necessary evil, it's a positive good. So we go from the perspective of slavery is a necessary evil to slavery is a positive good, that it's actually better to have slavery than it to not have slavery, okay? Um, and so, a very different perspective. So Calhoun is going to be like, hey, we need a stronger fugitive slave laws. Okay, we need to have slavery everywhere, right? I don't know why we're still debating this, right? So two opposite ends of the debate. Consequences of manifest destiny. Okay, so because manifest destiny is going to push us to get more and more land, and it's going to lead conflict, guys. Tension over slavery, which is going to lead to the Civil War, and tension versus the Native Americans is going to lead to more conflict, more hostility, more lives lost. It's going to be a very tragic endeavor, right? Manifest destiny is not all happy-go-lucky as we have historically been made to believe in elementary school and middle school, right? Okay, so the Wilmot Proviso um, is going to have a direct influence on the events leading up to the Civil War because it's going to set up a platform for the free soilers, right? So the Wilmot Proviso, even if it's not successful, right? Sometimes your ideas are good, maybe they're not successful, maybe it doesn't like sit well with everyone, but later on it might catch on, right? So that's why we should always share our ideas. Um, so the Wilmot Proviso is going to lead to a strong strengthening of this anti-slavery movement, right? And so there's going to be the Free Soil Party that emerges from here, and it's going to influence the newly formed Republican Party that Abraham Lincoln is going to become the champion for, right? So the sectionalism intensifies, guys. Okay, from the get-go, right? If we look back at changing continuity over time and at contextualization, sectionalism is going to start in the colonies, guys. You're going to have the northern colonies different than the southern colonies in terms of their economies. You're going to have manufacturing in the north and agriculture in the south. And the agriculture is going to rely on slavery because of the labor-intensive plantations that are emerging in the south. Um, so, both sides are going to move to the west, and they're both going to want their stance on slavery to spread, right? So the North's going to want anti-slavery in the West, and the South's going to want slavery in the West. For instance, pro-slavery people, they wanted to take over all of Mexico, all of South America, pretty much the whole continent, but the whole two continents, to make more slavery plantations, right? So like, oh, we'll take over Mexico, we'll make it all slave plantations. But then, people are like, no, why would you want to take Mexico? There's a bunch of people who aren't white, so that would cause problems. So, right, we could have taken Mexico, and it was for a bad reason, but we didn't take Mexico because it was also another bad reason. But you can see how different it was back then. All right. Great. Compromise of 1850. Let's get to the Compromise of 1850. So, with all this new land coming into play for Mexico, there's a need to make some changes. So the Compromise of 1850 is established. So there's a compromise, meaning both sides get something that they want. The anti-slavery movement is going to get California as a free state, end of slave trading in Washington, D.C., but the pro-slavery side is going to get the stricter fugitive slave law. Yes, they do settle the territory issues with Texas, but also New Mexico and Utah territories are going to use popular sovereignty to decide whether they are going to have slavery there or not. So they're going to vote instead of having that line like from the Compromise of 1820, the Missouri Compromise, the 3630 parallel line. So yeah, this is the bad news for the anti-slavery people, because if there's popular sovereignty, then that could spread to all of the territories, and then people will just vote. And there's a lot of sketchy things that can happen in elections and with voting, especially back in the day. And so it just opens the door for slavery to spread all over the place. So there's Henry Clay, poor Henry Clay. He was like, dude, this is too crazy. I made the Compromise of 1820, and then what? We're doing the Compromise again? I can't figure this out, guys. It's too confusing. Okay. I thought we were trying to make it easy. Oh, this is a creepy picture. We looked at this before. Okay, so Democratic platform, look, Kansas, Cuba, they want to expand slavery. Help murder, help, neighbors, help. Oh, my poor wife and children. They're pushing the slavery, forcing slavery down the throat of a free soiler, right? So this is supposed to like shock you, right? This is an anti-slavery political cartoon, okay? The Democratic platform, they were pro-slavery, so like they're holding down the free soiler and they're shoving down slavery down his throat. So this is not easy to look at. This is not Attack on Titan, by the way. Okay. Um, Although maybe it was an influence. Who knows? Okay, so briefly explain the point of view expressed by the cartoonist about one of the following: territorial expansion, states' rights, attempts at political compromise. Let's take a minute to think about these guys. You pick one of them and try to see if you can figure out. It's like a content check so far. Okay, so 1 minute on the clock. Hey Google, minute on the clock.
All right, 1 minute, and that's starting now.
Hey Google, stop. Okay, let's take a look, guys. All right, so depending on what you chose, right, this is what you should have come up with. Um, so they mentioned Kansas on the Democratic platform, and so people saw that as a slave conspiracy, right? Um, for states' rights, um, the Democratic Party was subverting individual choice of citizens on the frontier, attempting to facilitate the expansion of slavery, contrary to the wishes and votes of local citizens in this region. And so it runs counter to the ideal of local control and states' rights. Attempts at political compromise, um, the actions of politicians and policies of one of the major political players leave very little room for compromise since anti-slavery citizens are sort of held captive audience and constituency to these politicians and policies. So if we go back, um, you know, just the point of view of this, you know it's anti-slavery, right? Because it is pretty, it's not like, oh, okay, like they're throwing like innocent African Americans. Um, so in terms of territorial expansion or states' rights or political compromise, you just have to support the argument of an anti-slavery free soiler during this time, right? And so these would be the perspectives of an anti-slavery free soiler in the issue of expansionism or states' rights or political compromise. Okay, so here's the key takeaway for Manifest Destiny and the Rise of Sectionalism. So divisions and debates over slavery are going to be intensified by expansionism, and it's going to eventually lead to the Civil War, right? Another huge factor is population is growing. A lot of immigrants are still coming in, and that's going to drive Manifest Destiny. Okay, it's going to get too crowded. We're going to move west. Okay, so we grow, and the growing pains are going to lead to conflict, right? Great. So let's explain why the Compromise of 1850 of the following developments was the most significant factor contributing to the outbreak of the Civil War. This is going to be the exit ticket for today, guys. But before we do that, let's take a look. And let's hope that the ad is okay. We will not look at the ad. No, not Manifest Destiny. We're going to look at We saw this in class before, guys. It was a TED Ed on the um, Kansas-Nebraska Act. Oh, we'll do that tomorrow. We didn't go over the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and it kind of summarizes everything. Yeah, we'll do that tomorrow. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, there is one on the Compromise of 1850, and it's the same dude. I totally thought I had that loaded. Let's take a look. There we go. We'll look at the Missouri Compromise tomorrow.
So the name is Dr. Alan J. Hynek. Weren't you with a thing called Project Blue Book?
Hi, my name is Matthew Pinsker. I'm a historian, and here are a few things you need to know to sound smart about the Compromise of 1850. But in 1850, things are way more complicated than before because it's the aftermath of the Mexican War with the acquisition of territory in the West in an era of great sectional strife. This is right after the gold rush in California of 1849, and there's an awful lot of pressure over what to do about admitting a state in the West that doesn't have a history of slavery and might alter the sectional balance between slave and free states in the U.S. Senate. And in January of 1850, a senator named Henry Clay, who's famous as a compromiser in American history, he offered a package of proposals to try to adjust the sectional debate between the country over this issue. And the debate in the Senate was fierce and intense, some of the most dramatic scenes in American history. And they turned over the architecture, the engineering of this compromise package to Stephen Douglas, a younger senator from Illinois, a Democrat. And Douglas decided that the only way to get enough support for all of the different elements of the compromise was to break it apart and treat it separately. When it achieved final form as a series of separate bills in the fall of 1860, there were only 5 bills. One was about the admission of California as a state, a free state. One was about the organization of the Southwest Territories, New Mexico and Utah, without regard to slavery. One was about the adjustment of the border with Texas and New Mexico. One was about the elimination of the slave trade in the District of Columbia. And the 5th and final bill, and most important for Southerners, a tougher federal fugitive slave law. Afterwards, enough people were relieved that they felt like they had achieved a kind of compromise, but most historians realize it was a shaky one at best. And even though it appeared for a couple of years that it would succeed, very quickly the fabric of the so-called Compromise of 1850 fell apart.
Young people in large...
Excellent. Thank you, Matthew. Thanks, Matt. All right. So let's take a minute to work on this thesis statement, right? A thesis statement that responds to this prompt. So we're going to answer this question in a thesis statement. And this will be the exit ticket for today, guys. Just a thesis statement. Because some of you haven't finished your DVQ yet, please finish it. All right. It is on the internet. It literally has the exemplars on College Board. All right, but we'll talk about that. All right, explaining why the Compromise of 1850 and the following developments was the most significant factor contributing to the outbreak of the Civil War. Minute on the clock. Hey, Google. Minute on the clock.
Sure, 1 minute, and that's starting now.
Think of the Wilmot Proviso. Popular sovereignty, guys. Remember, the Compromise of 1850 is going to undo the Missouri Compromise from 30 years earlier. Popular sovereignty. Hey Google, stop. Okay. So we should have focused on popular sovereignty. That's going to come about in the Compromise of 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act. So the balance, there no longer is an easy way to maintain balance between the states, and it's going to lead to just stuff breaking down. Kansas-Nebraska Act is going to be one of the last nails in the coffin before the Civil War. The Dred Scott decision, which we'll talk about tomorrow. So, by undoing the Missouri Compromise and allowing the possibility of slavery in Utah and New Mexico territories, the 1850 Compromise effectively demolished the fragile truce between the north and southern sections of the United States. The fugitive slave law also inflamed northern and anti-slavery passions. So that's going to set the stage for the Civil War to happen, guys. If they would have kept that balance up, I mean, who knows? Maybe the Civil War would have been delayed a little bit longer. Um, but we have to think about this, and we're going to think about it for tomorrow's lesson. What was the most important cause of the American Civil War? Great. Well, that was today's lesson, folks. Study hard and make sure you have your DBQ finished. All right, have a great day, guys.